Welcome back to Martins and More. My name's Maury Rutch.
And I'm Spoon Phillips.
And today's episode is brought to you by the Martin M36. The M36 is equal parts one of the least popular Martins and, at the same time, one of the most versatile. It's one of those guitars that doesn't get mainstream attention, but those players in the know that the M36 is a great guitar for so many styles. If you'd like more information on the Martin M36, please visit maurysmusic.com today.
Yes, the M36 is the only M in the catalog right now. It has a triple O depth, but a jumbo top and back width, and it's a very, very balanced with a mid-range that's right up balanced with the bass and the treble. I kind of hear them in my ears as a supersized triple O, extra volume. Arlo Guthrie, David Bromberg, Jorma Kaukonen. There are some people out there that absolutely love the M size, and the M36 with its three-piece rosewood back is attractive and easy to play for a long-scale guitar. So if dreadnoughts are too big for you, try out that M36.
I have to ask you, Spoon, as far as today's topic, what do Riding Off to Boston, Abbott's Bromley, Claudia's Garden, and The Bicyclist have in common?
Well, let's see. They are all instrumental fingerstyle compositions by yours truly.
I don't know how you knew that, but that's exactly the answer I was hoping for. Let's take today, Spoon, if you don't mind. I want to talk about the recording process, the inspiration, the guitars used, everything we always wanted to know about Lost and Haunted Ways, but we're afraid to ask. I want to find that stuff out today.
Well, okay. So I'll try to be as brief as possible in terms of the concept. I mean, because it's basically a concept album. And in 2006, I began a love affair with and within England. So the album itself is, in a way, about a 6-year relationship and then the following 6 years when a great deal of the music finally came out. And so every song, every tune on it is in some way related to that. And some of them were written as songs in the sense that I specifically wanted to create a melody that sounds like a song. And in a couple of cases, there is lyrics involved, though they've never been shared with anybody. Other ones were more modal or more rhythmic, and I guess people will have to listen to excerpts, which they can do at my website, tspguitar.com. That's TSP as in T Spoon Phillips guitar.com. You can also find links to it on onemans.com as well. And my connection with the subject really goes way back, because even growing up as a little kid, my mother's mother was quite proud of her English and Scottish heritage, and they have family, records and family trees going back to medieval times in terms of who we're related to over there. Even though everybody on both sides of my mother's and father's family were over here by 1800 or just before 1800. So it's really just more a matter of family pride and perhaps DNA. But so that's where the idea came from. And so there's 12 tunes. And ironically, since I just said this was all about England, the opening tune is called Riding Off to Boston. And the closing tune is called Riding Back from Boston. And that's because, for a couple of reasons. The original first tune that really kind of started this all off was Riding Back from Boston, which people have heard me do on your various videos and my own videos, because it's the fingerstyle piece that I do to show sort of relaxed fingerstyle playing when demonstrating guitars. And of all the pieces I've ever done, that's the one that gets the most email of, what tune is that? And, and where can I get that tune? Well, you can get it on the album Lost and Haunted Ways, and you can get the tablature from it and other songs as well as my website.
It's funny, I just remembered every time I try to type this title in a hurry, I almost always type Lost and Hanooted Ways. I have a really bad habit of typing poorly, and much like sometimes I'll say Martin is Maritn, I just almost always make a typo here. When I look at it back on a graphic or something on YouTube, I'm like, I don't know if anybody likes the album Lost and Hanooted Ways, but would you ever consider changing the title?
Well, I don't know. We may have to talk to Al Yankovic about that. I'm sure he could make something out of that. So with that, those two pieces, Riding Off to Boston, Riding Back from Boston, are basically the same tune. One of them's upbeat and done in very upbeat pace and tempo, and is somewhat effervescent. The other is more slow and contemplative. And this is something that a lot of people seem to be surprised about. Most of the album is in standard tuning. There's a couple of, there's some tunes on there that are not in standard tuning, but both of these are in standard tuning. Fingering for the key of G, though Riding Off to Boston is with a capo, so higher up the neck, again to help lighten the mood. And if you've never been up that way, what used to be the old postal road goes right by the home of John Adams, the second president of the United States. And me and the English woman in question had gone up there at one point. So that's kind of was sort of the inspiration of somebody who was heading up to Boston to see their true love and the anticipation of that. And so that's where that tune came from. And that is, I guess, the seeds of this album and then what came in between it. The second song is called A Morning Star Over Staffordshire, and that is, in fact, in Dadgad. And Staffordshire is up in the Midlands, north of Birmingham. It is around the area where J.R.R. Tolkien came up with his idea of the Shire. And, in fact, you will see real-life hobbits out there, these short, round bowling ball people in their caps and pitchforks out with their hay bales and their sheep. And there's absolutely no question that that's where Professor Tolkien grew up, in that neck of the woods, and that's where he got his imagery for the hobbits that you see in The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. But really lush, awesome green hill country and pasture land primarily. And so that is basically a contemplative piece, the kind of thing that I would sit there and go over and over in an open tuning or sometimes in just drop D and let the feeling of the place come over me, whether in memory or actually sitting out, in a landscape or something like that, or meditating on a particular idea or a particular person. And this is a very good example of that, though ultimately this tune, it was meant to be the kind of tune that you would hear on like a Victorian music box. So that was the feeling that I was going for, when you could open one of those ornate, music boxes and have it tinkle through. And I was always amazed by those as a small child, particularly the music box that played Quentin's theme on Dark Shadows, the soap opera about vampires and werewolves. But that was the very first Victorian music box that really wowed me. But I think that was probably in the back of my head when I was doing that tune. I think there may be even a video of me doing a version of that at Maury's Music at one point that may or may not be on the internet. But
oh yeah.
But it had gone through many titles, and I actually have a little poem on the website that said, I retitled this tune since it won't be played through, but I'm back in that garden of English dew, where the dawn's early birds must still twitter and dart near the midland spot where I left my heart, beneath the tree in Piggy Lane, from whence it has never been reclaimed. And just, to be fair, that love affair officially ended in 2012, so it's been a while. So, and she and I have still remained very good friends, and her photography is all over that my website. But anyway, that's what I ultimately came up with for Long Story Over Staffordshire. That's followed by the tune Abbots Bromley, which by coincidence in the Big Book of British Villages is the very first listing because of its ABB start. Abbots Bromley is the village where she grew up, and over there traditionally a village was large enough to have a church. So a hamlet is basically a village that isn't big enough to have its own church. A village is big enough to have its own church. A town has an official market in medieval days where you would get a royal charter, a royal warrant to have a farmer's market for the neighboring farmland. So that's what would make a town. And then a city had to have a cathedral, though those rules have changed a lot. So you can have very small cities because they have a cathedral, and really big towns because they don't have a cathedral. But anyway, Abbots Bromley was big during the English Civil War for smuggling. Mary Queen of Scots stayed there as a prisoner of her sister Queen Elizabeth on some royal progress to one of her prison castles, probably Tutbury Castle, which is in that same county. And for this is an instrumental that is an actual song that actually has lyrics, though they've never been presented. But the idea of it was an Anglican hymn, and that's what it's supposed to sound like. And the chorus of Abbots Bromley, bum, 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 is really supposed to be a homage to that town with their Norman church and all that. So that's the first three. So the first quarter of the album is Riding Off to Boston, followed by Morning Star over Staffordshire, and then followed by Abbots Bromley, which is in Staffordshire.
I have to ask you now, at this part of the program, listening to describe the first three songs of the first quarter, is it a dumb question to ask? Because I wonder if someone else is thinking the same thing. Are these the first three songs you recorded for the album, or was it recorded out of order?
Oh, it was recorded out of order. Later on, I'll get to. There were some things that really didn't even get finished until the album was recorded, and like with a lot of instrumental tunes and even songs that I've written, they continued to live on and evolve. So this was a place in time where these were recorded. But yeah, these were not recorded in order. I knew that I was going to close with the last tune, Riding Back from Boston. And so that's when I decided to put the bookend on it. And the faster version, just because I liked the chord progression, I had never really initially considered to be a tune. But so I basically turned that into its own thing. And they're not exactly the same. There's differences to it in other than the speed between the first and last song of the album. But Abbots Bromley was already Morning Star over Staffordshire. That one was developed early on. And Abbots Bromley, I actually first started coming up with, like I said, during that kind of meditative period where I'm playing and letting my mind go, actually began in Abbots Bromley, even though that's in standard tuning. The fourth tune is the oldest tune. It's the only one that pre-existed this concept of making the album, and that's the Steeds of Culloden. Or Culloden, depending on who you ask. And years ago, an old friend of mine from college was one of the head guys on the a Scottish society here in New York City. And so they would do performances at La Mama ETC, the Experimental Theater Club, which used to be called Café La Mama, which was Ellen Stewart invented off-Broadway theater in the 1950s. And because she was an African-American woman who was having performances behind closed doors with white men, she was getting harassed. And so she had to get a cafe license to legitimize what they were doing with these, probably, I don't know if they still called them beatniks at that time. But this is the place where Sam Shepard's plays were developed, and people like that. But, of course, we're not going that far back. This is just, we're talking about in the early 2000s, late 1990s. My friend Thomas Keith, who's a Tennessee Williams scholar and a Robert Burns scholar, have been involved with Stuart for years professionally. So she allowed us to do the fundraising concerts for the Scottish Society at La Mama ETC in the same space where Blue Band Group started, actually, but in around that same time. And so a bunch of people from all over the place, real Celtic musicians and people like me who liked Celtic music and people who had nothing to do previously with Celtic music, would get together and do these shows. And then we'd also at times perform at their Burns supper that they would have, Robert Burns, or around Robert Burns' birthday. And so I wanted to do a piece called The Steeds of Culloden. And I did research on the Battle of Culloden, which Culloden was in 1746. It was the last battle ever fought on Great Britain. And it was the end of the Jacobite rebellion, where the forces that wanted to bring in the Stuart family with Bonnie Prince Charlie tried to do a revolt, mainly with Highlanders, and they were soundly defeated by the British Army and the their Lowland Scotland allies. And so it's still to this day a very controversial thing in Scotland. But in my research, I learned there were no steeds at Culloden, basically, because the weather had been so bad that the British cavalry had gotten bogged down and basically missed the battle, as well as their European mercenaries, which was a bad thing, because after the Highlanders, charged into the British lines and got mowed down, and it was almost like Bunker Hill or Gettysburg, where because of the terrain and they only broke through in one place, and very similar to Pickett's charge at Gettysburg, and suffered horrible losses and then retreated. And then the British cavalry and dragoons that had basically missed the battle basically went berserk and committed all kinds of very nasty deeds out among the wounded and all that. So this is an adventure tale about a young man escaping the carnage of Culloden on horseback, pursued by all the king's horse, and you'll have to decide whether he makes it back or not. But so basically, it's a tone poem about a chase over the terrain in Scotland in 1746. So, and originally it was done with mandolin and flute and accordion with the guys that I play with here in New York City, but we never have recorded it that way. But I hope to do that someday soon.
I reserve the right to change my mind, but off the cuff, it might be my very favorite guitar part from this whole CD. And whenever we're at the Martin factory or doing some videos together and you just break into it without announcing it coming, it's just like this bang. And I just love I love the phrasing. It just has a mood to it that's almost electric guitar-like to me. And every time I hear it, it takes me back to the first time that I did, which was a long time ago.
Well, thank you. The concept around that song musically was I wanted to try to write a tune in standard tuning, but approach it like it was in an open tuning. So that basically required me to do it in E minor, because that's the closest thing to what open tuning is. So it's in E minor, but it's very much played as if it's a open tuning kind of tune. So if people are not familiar with it, you've certainly heard the opening licks on various videos online. The tune after Steeds of Culloden, Culloden number 5, is the Ibex and Blackstock Road. This has it on the website that's about the album. It has its own little poem saying, "There once lived an ibex back in the day at the crossroads near where the gunners play, and as spry as a lamb in May, so they say." And an ibex, if you're not familiar with them, is one of the largest members of the goat family. So look them up, because they're really cool looking, and they like to do stuff like get on top of people's houses in Switzerland and stuff like that. So they're amazing climbers, and they're some of the most daredevil, high precipice climbers out there. And the person in question that greatly influenced this said that she had always wanted to be an ibex growing up. And and she lived in Blackstock Road in London, in Highbury and Islington, just down the road from the old Arsenal Stadium, the Gunners being the team nickname for Arsenal, the famous British soccer team. They've since moved to a different stadium, and that stadium now has been converted into apartments, and the inside of the stadium is now shared public gardens for everybody who lives inside the stadium grounds, which is a pretty amazing way to use a structure like that rather than tearing it down. But anyway, so this is in a tuning that I just came up with, or maybe other people use it, but it's basically like Dadgad, but the D is dropped down to C. So it's an unusual tuning, but it's a lot of fun to play around with. And the whole center section, it's completely improvised. So anytime I've performed it, it's always come out completely different than it is on the record. But in fact, I need to bring that back out. That's pretty rusty because I don't drop it down into that tuning very often. But I enjoy that tune a lot. It's fun and sprightly. And then the sixth, the end of the first half of the album, is a tune called Claudia's Garden. And when I talk about those kind of meditation improvisations, this was done in the studio, and I maybe played for almost 25 minutes. And this is something I had done with this. This is in drop D, and I had done it on and off, waiting for Claudia's Garden to really come out. And so in the studio, I actually sat there and played for almost 25 minutes probably. And so Claudia's Garden is really just the last cycle of that. And so because I would start over and I would go over and I'd just go in these secular patterns, and I had these parts in mind, and I would have different parts come in at different places and just let that roll while I meditated on Claudia's Garden, which there's actually a photo of it on the website of me sitting in Claudia's Garden. Claudia is the mother of the person in question, and so this was really kind of thinking about her and her daughters and her granddaughters, and thinking of that kind of going over and over in my head. And so that's where that came from. And when it comes to recording the album, this was the very last thing I recorded. And I wished I could have started over, because I felt like I had finally perfected the mic placement and everything else, and the preamps and all that. To me, when I listen to the record, particularly on headphones, this is where I finally got it right, and I wished I could have started over, but there was no way I could afford the studio time and the time to do that. So, because, and unfortunately, due to the nature of those kind of studios, it wasn't like we could leave the mics there, because I was basically coming in on early Saturday mornings, and I would sometimes have to get up really early to get in and be able to use the studio space. And so I had to set up everything, the baffles, everything had to be set up, every time. And I tried to make notes, and I would try to deal with it, but I finally got it right with Claudia's Garden. At least that's how I feel about it.
That's really fascinating. Would you mind if we take a little pause here, Spoon? I'd love to ask you to go into some more detail about the recording process that I think our listeners might appreciate it too.
So this record was recorded in Manhattan at 19 Mercer Street, which is a building, I wish I could remember the man's name, a very famous person in the recording world, started that building. It's all remixing, and it's mixing and remixing studios. But then they have a studio in there for doing recording when it's necessary. Yeah, overdubbing and just re-recording things that need to be re-recorded. And I simply didn't have the funds available to record this record the way I wanted to record it. Even people, I know that people own Dubway studios in New York and stuff, and I just, even at friends' rates was beyond my means at that time. So I was lucky to get in there. And So I tried different microphones. I thought I was going to use my small Neumanns, but in that space, I actually liked these Octava, these Russian mics that were hot rodded by Michael Jolly, and that service is not available anymore. But basically, they have totally different capsules. And he rewires them, so basically it's just the outside and the grill of these Octava mics, and they just had a nice warmth to them, similar to the older small Neumanns. But so what I would do is I would record in a left-right pattern, very similar to what you see me do in the Martin videos and for One Man's Guitar. And back when I would be able to record in Martin's sound testing room before COVID hit, you would see me recording with 3 microphones. When we now do the modern recording at the museum on stage, I can't use the 3rd microphone because the room is just way too boomy. So what I had is 2 small diaphragms and basically an XY position. And then I had a large diaphragm that's more directly in the traditional straight on at the 12th fret. And then when I mix, I would basically just bring in just enough. So on that record, I bring in the large diaphragm mic, which is also another hot-rodded Michael Jolly mic. I would bring that in the mix just where you wouldn't notice it was missing if it wasn't there. So it's primarily the 2 small diaphragm mics. The one, as the guitarist view, the one that's on the left side, the neck side, is at the 12th fret but pointing at the 17th fret. And it is just out of reach of my hand leaning over. So I don't remember the exact distance, but it's a good ways back. This is something that Howie Emerson had taught me, was to record, if you're in a room that you like, record with the mic far enough out so you're getting some room and you're getting some air. And then the other microphone is parallel to that, but pointing at just behind the bridge. So that's how I set the mic placement up for those mics. And like I said, every Saturday I would go in there between, I guess this was recorded June 10th to June 25th, 2018. So there, probably 5 sessions involved in there. And I would have to set everything else up. But that was the goal, to get the mic set up that way. And then the large diaphragm mic was out even a little farther. But that's basically how I set them up. I use an Antelope preamp and Discrete 4. And Antelope is the company that gives you all those digital mic modules, so you can make something sound like, all these different mics. And they have a bunch of other digital mic models. I've never used any of that. I just got them because I like to sometimes use up to 4 mics at a time. And so I wanted to have something with 4 preamps, and Antelope was highly rated in terms of how clean the preamps are. And so that's what I went with that. And so, like I said, I would go in and I tried a bunch of different guitars, even borrowed some guitars. Ultimately, it came down to, sometimes did I like the sound of it, and it came down to other times my playing and what I played. And so ultimately there's only 3 guitars on the album.
Well, I have to ask you now, this really makes me wonder, when you're talking about one certain guitar was on one track, when you're in the writing process, and I don't know how deep you want to delve into some of these questions, say you're writing Abbott's Bromley, did you know while you're writing it which guitar would sound best, or were you kind of making your choices during the recording process?
Well, certainly for the recording process, I made the choices during the recording process. But there's times where a guitar definitely influences the music that comes out of me, and I think that's the case for a lot of people. I think when you get a new guitar, I honestly believe you're probably going to come up with music that you would have never come up with if it wasn't for that guitar. I think sometimes you instinctually start to play certain ways because of the kind of sound you're making with a guitar, in terms of how hard you're pressing or wagging the strings around, or how hard you're playing, or not how hard how soft you're playing, and how long you let things ring out. And frankly, there are certain tunes, Steve's Culloden's one of them, that I think sound best on a dreadnought. And, and I have this very world-class Brazilian Adirondack dreadnought that's the back and sides are from 1966 D28 that had been destroyed. And our friends, Rich and Dave at Brothers Music in Wingate, Pennsylvania, they had just retired from the Martin factory. And so I gave them, I wanted to give them some business, and they did a conversion. So it's got, genuine, what Martin would call an authentic 1937 bracing and hide glue for the top, but it's got a modern neck with a low profile and a regular neck rod. But I love how it sounds, and there's tunes that aren't on there, and Steves of Culloden that are, robust instrumentals that I think sound best on that. I really couldn't get that guitar to work in that space and record well with it. So I gave up on that, and I stayed with the smaller auditorium-sized bodies, and and I didn't have a lot of help. It wasn't like I didn't go to Dubway. I didn't have like a professional engineers or anything like that, helping me out in that circumstance. I did this all by myself, so might have well have been a home studio, but I don't have anything in my home that has the sound protection and the dampening, all that stuff. So when it came to the actual what's on the record, sometimes it was I liked the sound of the guitar better, but there's a couple of times where I said I wish I could use that take, but I actually had a clam in there, and so I can't use that take. But I'll tell you what the three guitars were, and then at the very end of all this, I'll actually say which guitars were on what tracks. But one of them is a 2004 OMC 28B Lawrence Juber. It was my second Brazilian Lawrence Juber. I really regretted saddling the first one. And I have such a hard time with those V-necks with my old football injuries. But I had to have one, and I now I regret selling that one too. But yeah, so that one's used on the majority of the tracks was the Brazilian Juber. The second place comes the custom from 2017, the custom Triple OC 21 TSP, the one that Maury and Laurie were selling for a while there, and so that's came in second place, and then and then third place was the custom short scale Madagascar Triple OC 28 that with the wooden binding that. Was based on the Lawrence Juber models, but is in the short scale and has the GE Golden Era style V-neck with the 1930s heel, which I find a little more comfortable than the regular modified V-necks. That's Madagascar Rosewood Adirondack Spruce. It was in fact the very first custom shop guitar made in Madagascar Rosewood for a private customer. It was ordered. Wow. It was ordered the day. The day I went to NAMM reveal at the Martin factory, and Tim Teal was taking me through the models for that year, and I said, "Well, it's been a year since you guys started using Madagascar Rosewood. Doesn't that mean people are allowed to?" Order Madagascar Rosewood for custom guitars. And he said, I don't know. And this young woman was walking by, and he said, would you ask Mr. Fair to come out here? So Bob Fair comes out and sees me and has that look of, oh no, now what? And he comes out and he says, Tim says to him, so are we going to allow custom orders of the Madagascar Rosewood now? And he looked at me and he said, what do you want? And I started telling him, and he said, "Oh, hold on a second." He takes out this little jotter pad from his shirt pocket and takes out the little, almost like golf course little pencil from behind his ear, and so we worked it out. And I, just kind of gestured to my left and said, "Well, my dealer happens to be standing right here," which happens to be the other person in this podcast. And so Bob went back into his office and worked up a quote, and that was that. So, and that guitar is now proudly and happily owned by Jim Kalika, our good friend. So
Oh, wow.
again, those V-necks, I had to give them up. So that came in third place. But those are the only guitars that are on the record.
Well, pardon me just 1 minute. I'm just making my notes here. Recorded the entire album with rosewood. Okay, got it. I'm going to say it. Why didn't you choose to record anything on this important album with mahogany?
I did record with mahogany, but it didn't make the cut for the same reason. So I have my...
Whoa, say that again for posterity.
I did record various tunes on various mahogany guitars, including my OOC 16 from the 1990s that I love, but I don't know if it was the room, microphones, preamps, whatever it was, or just some of those cuts. Again, I made a mistake or too many mistakes for my persnickety ways, and so they didn't make the record. So.
Of course, I'm kidding, but that's fascinating. And as long as I've known you, and as long as I've known this album, I've just put it in my mind that I kind of picture what you're playing, but I never gave myself enough time to really be disciplined enough to wonder and guess about some of these facts, and to just realize that, I don't know if you're a good record keeper or if you have a vault of stuff, it would be so interesting to me to find out later that you have some unreleased material from this record that were recorded by guitars like that, like your mahogany guitar, like anything that didn't make the cut. If you have a way of going back, even for your own personal enjoyment, have you ever gone to search to see, even if it has one tiny little mistake, are there tunes in the vault that would kind of give us a glimpse into what almost happened?
Well, I guess that's a really good question. Unfortunately, 2 different hard drive deaths might have eliminated that stuff, but I'm not sure. That's a very good question. I am not sure what survived recovery and what didn't, because, I guess a lot of artists, once it was in the can and once it was out, then, I'm more forward thinking than that, and it hadn't occurred to me. I do know that when it comes to the recording software that I used, I did keep the EQ settings. They're all there. When you go in and you give it a setting, you give it a name, they're all there. And I have cannibalized them in the past. When I've done my reviews at Martin, there have been times where instead of reinventing the wheel, I will go in and I'll look at settings and say, try this, because I don't do a lot of EQing per se when it comes to the guitar review stuff, but there are times when I can hear really, particularly in the factory museum stage, I can hear really high-end stuff coming off the walls and stuff like that I'll go in and massage and try to get rid of some anomalies from the space. But I keep all that stuff for reference, and also settings for compression, settings for limiting and stuff like that, which I had to do on this record. I've never liked using that stuff, but different guitars, different days, there were times when I had to put on some compression or a limiter. And I don't know if people know the difference, but a limiter basically gives you a brick wall that says nothing is there will be no peak beyond this. And it's different than compressing. So I would do that too. It's difficult really to record acoustic guitars without applying some of that stuff to get, particularly if you're when you're mastering, as they call it, which I did myself. They always say you should get somebody else to master, but I couldn't afford that either. But when it came to the mastering stuff, wanting to make sure that the levels were at least in the same ballpark across the 12 tunes. Mm-hmm. The software I used was I used Reaper, which is a shareware. It's a public software. I don't remember. It's been so long since I got it. They may ask for like a $60 donation, but they don't like turn it off on you if you don't put it in there. And it's constantly being updated. And just like with the preamps and all that stuff, there was way more bells and whistles than I ever need when I'm just basically recording acoustic guitar and multiple tracks. So, but that's what I've always used, and it's it's not much different than Cubase or Pro Tools or whatever when it comes to the tracks and manipulating the tracks. They're all pretty similar programs.
So it wasn't like you ever had a recorder mix down 20 tracks.
I've done it. I mean, I've played around with that stuff, and you heard the CD I threw together for the second Martin Fest, where there is some multi-tracking there, where I put down some lead guitar stuff, or I'll have multiple guitars and things like that. But not like my friends that do, synth drums and 4 different synthesizers and all that stuff, and people that I've recorded for. I've always been amazed to watch people that are really using 64 tracks. And
I mean, 64 is too many, but 20 is a good number.
Well, have you used? I mean, like when you did your CD, how many tracks do you think you used by the time you were through with everything?
Are you asking me a question that has the number 20 in it? I don't understand.
Uh-oh. Are we getting close to 20 questions?
Your segue game is weak today, Spoon. I'm sorry.
That's quite all right. Well, this is the game that we play here at Martins and More, where one of us thinks up a Martin guitar model, and the other gets up to 20 questions to guess which that is, and up to maximum 3 guesses. Now, we seem to be having a little civil war here, because I didn't think the guesses counted as questions, but Maury, last time, assumed that that was true. So I'll leave it up to you as the host of the show, as I'm just the Ed McMahon who sits there and goes,
we'll have a civil war about that. I believe we are 50-50 in co-hostdom. One of our loyal listeners, his name on YouTube is Andora's Revenge. And over the past couple weeks, it's been Maury's Revenge, because I got my face splattered all over the game 2 weeks ago. So I really, really made it impossibly unfun for Spoon to play last week. And maybe we'll become a little bit more civil. I'm surely hoping that today's round is not as painful for both of us and the listeners, but I would love to try my hand again at your version of my 20 questions.
So wait a second. Are you setting me up saying for the second week in a row you want to have a model and have me guess?
No, I just forget which week it is.
Okay. Well, all right. I need to just double check something here, because I do not want to be caught out giving bad information. So you now have 20 questions on the clock. Go.
Is this guitar bigger than a Dreadnought?
No.
Is this guitar smaller than a double O?
No.
Is this guitar the size of a triple O?
I should have guessed you were going to ask that, but no.
Man, I hate this game ever since week 2. Is this guitar a double O?
No.
Is this guitar a 6-string guitar?
Yes, that's your first yes, and that was question number 5.
Is this guitar a Little Martin?
No, that's question number 6.
Is this guitar the Backpacker?
That's question number 7, and no.
Is this guitar an O?
No, and you're really going to hate yourself.
Is this guitar a bass?
No, you asked me if it was a 6-string guitar. That's
it.
9. I think you've already out-clevered yourself. You're going to really kick
I'll
yourself.
Have I asked enough questions that I should know which size this is?
Not exactly. That's no.
Is this guitar...
So let's review, because you're now up to 10. Your first question was, is this guitar larger than a dreadnought? Your second guitar was this guitar smaller than a double O. Your third one, was it a triple O? Your fourth one was, gosh, I don't remember now.
All right, my 11th question is going to be, is this a dreadnought?
Yes.
I do hate myself the way I phrased that question. I've got to be way more clear in every facet of life, especially this show. Okay, is this guitar made with mahogany back and sides?
Finally, no.
You finally said no? Is this guitar made with rosewood back and sides?
Yes.
Does this guitar have pearl anywhere on the front?
Yes.
Is this guitar a D42?
No. That's 14 questions by my reckoning.
Is this guitar a D41?
That's 15 questions, no.
Is this guitar a D45?
Yes!
God.
16 questions.
Am I allowed to carry my 4 reserves into next week?
At 16 questions, you get seduced by the size thing, I think. But the D45, the Dreadnought in Style 45, is, of course, the flagship of the Martin Standard series. It is made with an unbelievable amount of abalone pearl, high-colored abalone inlaid around the edge of the top, the sound hole rosette, on all edges of the back and the side, including where the heel of the neck comes in, and also the box around the end pin area, and of course the gorgeous, huge, big, luscious hexagons on the fretboard, and beautiful multicolored abalone, the classic C. Martin F logo, gold-colored tuners, rosewood back and sides, of course, the top grade that you can possibly get, forward-shifted scallop bracing. I don't need to tell Maury this because he is one lucky customer who has one. And so we're all envious of Maury's D45, if not his 20 questions skills.
Well, I don't know what to say. At least I beat last time's record of 20 with no trophies to show for it. But that was such a fun version of that game, Spoon. I really appreciate you letting me win this time. And I'm going to be a little bit easier on you next week. Maybe I'll let you get it in 17.
That's big of you.
All right, we've talked about 6 tunes, 3 guitars, 3 microphones, 20 questions. We still have 6 wonderful tunes to talk about. Spoon, if there's any way possible, can we steer the conversation back to the matter at hand? And can you keep telling me great things about Lost and Haunted Ways, available at tspguitar.com?
Well, thank you. I'd be happy to. So the 7th tune is called The Bicyclist, and it is an imaginary bike ride, including gear changes and a very steep hill. Again, this is in standard tuning, key of C, and I try to use as many open strings as possible when I go up the neck. So when I do a high, like a high F up there, and a high C that are basically using open chords, and having to pay attention to the bass notes and stuff like that, of course. But anyway, this was inspired by my favorite bicyclist, who is the person that inspired the entire record. But what finally made me put it together, this was one of those songs that I would go play in a park or late night or whatever, and just and just never really nail it down. And I would just be happy to take these imaginary bike rides, as it were, out in the countryside. And then I was invited to perform in an episode of Bushwick Book Club, which is a live show here in New York City that's almost monthly. And the local producer asks a group of artists to read a book and then write songs or make some other kind of art, not just musicians, but these days it's mainly musicians, to write a song or a piece of music that was inspired by the book. And this is a show that exists in everywhere from Sweden and the UK and all over the States, New Orleans, Los Angeles, Seattle. Different places have them, but it all started in the Bushwick section in Brooklyn, right here in New York City. And the book that I was asked to compose for was a book called Schwinn, The Best Present Ever, and by Don Ralph. And it is a nonfiction book about the history of the Schwinn bicycle company. And it's one of those picture books. And so that's what really forced me into codifying this into the tune that it became. So that's The Bicyclist. And this has been used many times on as introductions to Maury's music videos and a one-man guitarist videos. So you'll certainly recognize it when you hear it. Then this is being followed by another tone poem of sorts. And it's called Cotswold Yellowstone Blues. And this is in Dadgad. And the Cotswolds is a landscape. In southern England, it's a swath of rolling green hill country that runs from the Thames Valley west of Oxford all the way to the Welsh Marches. And it's a place where this spooky melancholy can settle like fairy fog into the deeply overgrown dells and up over the forlorn hill crests that are now bald except for these ominous gnarled standing stones that are here and there, tilting this way and that mark the location of the barrows, which are ancient tombs of prehistoric princes right out of the Lord of the Rings. And that same blonde, weird blonde stone is used to make everything in the Cotswolds, from the farm walls to the storybook villages to the, I think, 3,000-year-old stone circle, like similar to Stonehenge, but smaller scale. And at that circle, right now, you can go there, and right in the center, you're going to find where the local druids and witches have left little straw people or other nature offerings that I can tell you are left unmolested by anyone who knows what's good for them. And so they thought of countless feats in countless armies marching across those weathered hills for countless centuries is where this came from, and it's the soundtrack to that. So that's Cotswold's Yellowstone Blues. I don't know if you consider it ghostly, but I kind of imagine it as the ghosts of the armies heading out over there. And the very next tune is truly a ghost story. And those two tunes, Cotswold Yellowstone Blues and The White Lady of Tutbury, is where the album got its name, Lost in Haunted Ways. The working title of the project was Abbott's Bromley and Other Tunes, or something like that. But once The White Lady of Tutbury was codified, it became then I thought about doing The White Lady of Tutbury and other tunes or whatever, but then ultimately Lost in Haunted Ways came to me. Anyone who's heard my guitar review videos or my Maury's music videos has heard almost all the stuff that I've done on those are based on tunes from this record, but none more so than White Lady of Tutbury. That's the opening fingerstyle stuff that I do is from there. It's not exactly the same. I purposely don't do it exactly like the tunes, but But I always wanted to avoid copyright issues on YouTube, so I just came up with bits of music from various tunes that I play, and that's where the reviews come from. But that opening piece of fingerstyle that I always do is comes from the center section of The White Lady of Tutbury. It is a kind of a suite with 3 parts to it, and Tutbury Castle is a very cool place. It's a ruined castle. There had been a fortress there probably since prehistoric times up on the hill. The first castle was built directly after the Normans. It would have been wooden. It was the seat of power for John of Gaunt, the first Duke of Lancaster, who is the real-life inspiration for Tywin Lannister in the Game of Thrones series, which, of course, was going hot and heavy at the time this was all coming together. And he is the progenitor of several English kings, as well as the Tudor kings of Henry VII, Henry VIII, and Elizabeth were descended from his mistress, who eventually he married after his second wife died. And so the Pope legitimized those heirs, and ultimately they went on to become the Tudor kings. But he was an amazing soldier and power, broker at the time. Anyway, also it was one of Mary Queen of Scots' prisons. It wasn't the one where she was executed at, but she had been there for some time. And so a lot of people believe that the White Lady that haunts one of the towers at the ruins of Tutbury Castle is Queen Maury de Acoustic, or how you say Scotland in French. And she would have been a French speaker, of course, in those days. So we didn't get to see the ghost, but it is certainly a very evocative place. The castle was torn down after the Civil War to punish the people in the area for supporting the crown, and then the crown left it as a ruin, as a monument to King Charles I, who lost his head. And I am thoroughly convinced that the ghost is not Mary, Queen of Scots, but is John of Gaunt's first wife, who died quite young while he was away in foreign wars and actually died at the castle. And I think she is actually my vote for the ghost that walks the ruins. And so the opening bit is called John of Gaunt's Gateway, and it's basically the soundtrack to the marshalling of an army and the marching away of troops. The second one, which is used for that center, for the opening sequences of my guitar reviews, is called The Lady of the Tower, and basically imagining the lady left behind to while away the hours and perhaps remain at that castle forever. And then the third is called The Ghost's Walk, which kind of comes up to modern times in the ruins and the ghost coming out at night at Tutbury Castle. So if you ever get up into the Midlands of England, I highly recommend it. It's a pretty short drive from Derby. It's in Staffordshire, but just over the Derbyshire border, and it's a pretty cool place. Also, the best beer in the world comes from up in that area, and Burton-on-Trent in Derbyshire. So check it out if you can. There's my travel log.
Well, it's probably too early to talk about, but I think I'm going to go as John O'Gaunt for Halloween.
Yeah, there's one portrait of him that was made after he died, but if you look him up, anybody who's watched Game of Thrones, you can tell that the armor and look of Tywin Lannister was definitely greatly influenced by that one portrait. But
I'm making jokes, but this really is really cool. I'm trying to find a way to sound funny, but I shouldn't be. This is really a deeper dive than I thought I was going to get, and I hope our listeners are agreeing, but I think this is fascinating. Not even really hearing only the recording techniques for the inspirations, but there's so much history in what you're telling us here. This is just so wild.
So yeah, I mean, just to give you an idea of the time frames involved in this, Henry II, who was the king that Peter O'Toole plays in Becket and Lion of Winter, and was the father of Richard Lionheart in the Robin Hood King. He tried to take the castle by siege in the 1100s during what was an earlier civil war. And they don't call it a civil war, but that's what it was. And this was before he was king, eventually became king. John of Gaunt was 350 years later. So America's just over 200 years. So 50 years later, you get up into the time of John of Gaunt. And then and Blanche Bolingbroke, who the Bolingbroke family, if anybody knows English history, are also a big power broker family. Blanche was his first wife. And she and her daughter, who married the King of Portugal, or is descended from him. I forget how this works now. It's been too long. Her daughter ended up marrying into Portuguese society, and all of the kings and queens of Portugal, including the ones that still exist now, are descended from John of Gaunt and Blanche Bolingbroke. And then their grandsons and stuff became the kings of England and great-grandsons. And then the Civil War was later on, 1600s. But anyway, there used to be a very cool video out there. Somebody did a computerized model, almost like a drone flying around, a computerized model of what they think Tutbury Castle looked like, and the Tudor times during the time of Mary Queen of Scots. I don't know if it's still out there, but it's kind of cool.
Wow.
But so that's that ghost story, and that's where the title of the album came from, basically, Lost in Haunted Ways. And then the 10th song is Abbots Bromley Reprise, the reprise of Abbots Bromley, where Abbots Bromley is that Anglican hymn kind of sound, something that I could imagine a choir singing in a Episcopal church in England. Abbots Bromley Reprise is like a jaunty overland trip out in the countryside, and I almost hear it as like a march and a song. Like I said, there are lyrics, and someday they may be recorded, but it's the kind of thing that I could see, people marching down, whether soldiers or not, and singing this sort of robust, uplifting tune about Abbots Bromley. And that's in standard tuning. Let's see. So is White Lady Tutbury, standard tuning. So I went back to the Bicyclist. That's the one that's in the weirdest tuning. Cotswold Yellowstone Blues, I think I said, is Dadgad. Okay, now we're catching up to Clissold Park. Clissold Park is a musical interpretation of A Lazy Sunday in a park in central London, a short walk from where she used to live. She no longer lives in London. She lives in one of the first commuter towns outside of London now, being a great lover of the countryside. And but up in the Islington, Highbury area, Clissold Park it has like its own little zoo, and nowadays it's got like a big kiddie park in it. It used to not have that, but basically it starts out early morning, and then with a deserted park that gets more and more crowded with joyful park goers on a nice sunny Sunday. That's the idea of that tune, and that's also in open tuning, but with a capo. And then the very last piece is Riding Back from Boston, which started it all, which basically tells the musical story of a fella heading back down the old post road from Boston, where he said goodbye to his true love for the very last time before she sailed over the sea. And so I kind of pictured him on horseback, but I was actually in a Greyhound bus at the time, as it was our last meeting, and before we had to go our separate ways. It's a long story, but like I said, we still stay in touch, and we still have very high regard for one another. And she happily allowed me to use her photography on the album and on the website, pictures about the album. And though I may have one or two in there myself, I think she took most of them. But she's a very good amateur photographer, semi-professional amateur photographer. But and that is in a nutshell, the 12 tunes on Lost and Haunted Ways. People can order the album if they want directly through PayPal at onemans@onemans.com. You can also reach out to me at onemans@onemans.com email address. And if you don't use PayPal and want to use some other method. And pricing is reasonable. I don't remember what I put the prices on right now. I'll have to look it up on the website. But I think the prices are reasonable within the continental United States, Alaska and Hawaii. Also, there's a separate pricing for Canada and overseas. And, of course, there's a digital download. And some people like to get both. They like to have the hard CD and the digital download. So...
And if you can't tell by now, I really like this CD. And if you don't know that I like this CD, that just means you've never seen anything I've ever put on YouTube, because that's all we ever talk about. And it really is for good reason. I'm a lover of Martin guitars, instrumental music. And this, if you like either acoustic guitar or Martin, you'll just love this CD. And if you know somebody who's looking for something like this, it also makes a great gift. That's where I'm going to stop the commercialism. But I'm only saying because I listen to it and I love it. So...
Well, I hope your listeners aren't sick of hearing it by now, but I'm going to close this out by talking about the guitars that are on the different tracks. So, like I said, the Brazilian Lawrence Juber signature model, which is an OM 28 with an Adirondack spruce top, but with standard bracing, not the Golden Era bracing. And he plays really hard. I play really hard. I like having that extra strength behind the Adirondack. You don't, with that kind of bracing, you sacrifice some of the responsive sensitivity that GE bracing gives you. So, but if you're a robust player, you like to dig in. I sometimes find you get a better attack feeling out of the standard bracing, even with Adirondack. But anyway, it is also has a modified V-neck, and that's on track 1, 3, and 4, which is Riding Off to Boston, Abbott's Bromley, and the Steeds of Culloden. And then on 6, 9, and 11, so Claudia's Garden, White Lady of Tutbury, and Clissold Park. Those are all the Juber. The custom TSP model, which is Guatemalan rosewood back and sides with an Adirondack spruce top, short scale, low profile neck with a 1 11/16 inch profile, and cutaway. It's got scallop bracing, but again, they are standard scalloping. And old style 21 was based on David Lindley's late 30s, early 40s OM 21. And that is just on 2 tunes. That's on Morningstar or Staffordshire and Abbott's Bromley Reprise. Oh, I beg your pardon. That's not what that's on 4 tracks. I beg your pardon. I thought that sounded wrong. That's on track 5, 7, 8, and 12. So that is the Ibex and Blackstock Road, which was the first tune I recorded with that guitar, and first tune that I composed on that guitar, actually. And then 7 is The Bicyclist, 8 is Cotswolds Yellowstone Blues, and 12 is Riding Back from Boston. And then the custom short scale Madagascar Rosewood Adirondack Spruce Tripolo that our friend now owns, Jim. That's on 2 and 10. So that's on Morningstar over Staffordshire and Abbott's Bromley's Reprise.
So if I'm paying attention, and this is going to be on the test, Riding Off to Boston and Riding Back from Boston are 2 different guitars, and Abbott's Bromley and the Abbott's Bromley Reprise are 2 different guitars. I would have not guessed that if you wouldn't have told me.
Ah, that's interesting. That is true. And also, the second of each of those pairs is recorded with a capo. So I think Abbott's Bromley Reprise is recorded with the capo at 3. Though sometimes I do it with capo at 4 just to do that. And Abbott's Bromley Riding Off to Boston has the capo. Not Riding Back from Boston. Riding Off to Boston has the capo and capo 4, I'm pretty sure. There are tablature available for a lot of these tunes, but not all of them. And I don't really know if I'm ever going to have the ability or time to make all of them, but most of the tunes are available in tab, and at least one of them I put out with the tab available with the as if you're using a capo or as if you're not using a capo for people who are going to use other instruments on this. So in other words, I think the song's in C with the capo on the 2nd fret, and I'm pretty sure it's Clesso and Park that may be also available with tablature for D tuning, because that's really what it is. But anyway.
Careful, kids. Try this at home.
Well, I hope people will try it at home. Actually, I've been very pleased with. I get lots of orders for the tabs from all over the world. I'm quite chuffed, as they would say in England, that my music is that scattered far and wide, and that people like it enough that they want to play the tunes. And of course, our friend Roeth is extremely complimentary by not only recording some of my compositions, but actually putting them on YouTube with his own performances. So,
oh yeah, he's killing it. If you get an opportunity, find him on YouTube. Spoon, if there's ever a week you can't be here, I'm going to call him. He's so much like you in these recordings, it's scary.
He'd be a very fun guest. He's a fascinating guy. So, in terms of what he does with his working world and all that. So that might not be a bad idea for certain podcasts to have guests like that on. I mean, you should look into that.
And the seed was planted. And following the same logic, if you want us to be chuffed, give us a review on Apple Podcasts. We might even read your review on the air. Smith Jeff writes, "You guys did it again. Thank you for another awesome show. Maury, darn it. Too bad you can't ship to Japan. Your OM28V custom sounds just like what I was looking for. Darn. Laugh out loud. Catch you guys Monday, and all the best. Keep them coming."
Oh.
End quote. All right, Spoon. So as the co-host of this show, I just want to apologize for that language, but I read them like I see them.
Well, that's what you're good at.
That's going to be a weekly thing, Sundance, huh? Well, I'll tell you what, this was really a very fascinating show to me. I kind of knew what we might be getting into when we talked about doing it, but as we actually progressed through it, I learned so much that I had no idea was going to be here. So, Spoon, thank you so much for taking the time, bringing us into your mindset for a little while with regards to recording, writing, and being inspired to create Lost in Haunted Ways. And it was already a good album, but for me it's even better now knowing some of the secrets behind it. From all of us at Maury's Music, thanks for listening.
Hear you later.
This has been a presentation of Maury's Music, your trusted source for Martin and Blue Ridge guitars. Find us online at maurysmusic.com.